Tired of your car insurance rate going up, even with a clean driving record? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.
911, what's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walton, joined by Sergeant Walton. Clint, how are you?
I'm excellent.
You know, being married to a cop and doing the work that I do, having the discussions that I have on a regular basis, I think that one of the most uncomfortable things for me is when I see somebody who's talking about something that's basically summed up as the fact that leadership is creating vulnerability and making that officer unsafe. And I don't think that that's something that a lot of people talk about. Number one, because people are fearful of leadership. And number two, because people don't want to admit that leadership is the problem because they're supposed to be the ones that are mitigating those issues.
And I think a lot of it comes down to is that experience in which especially the leadership has or lack of having. And I think it's a question I pose to my guys all the time. Well, define leadership for yourself and define who do you think is a good leader. And because ultimately I think we start always, it's easier to always blame somebody else, especially from a leadership perspective, instead of looking internally. And there's instances, of course, where leadership makes poor mistakes or they make poor decisions, but we have to look internally a lot of times when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to address this sort of quiet shift that people, not only in law enforcement, but in fire and EMS even, experience when a lot of the times decisions seem like they're disconnected from reality. Communication might break down and that loyalty starts to feel one-sided. And ultimately, I think a lot of people have experienced when leadership no longer feels safe and your nervous system starts to adapt, but not in ways that are sustainable. And that's when I see people basically reach out to me the most.
Yeah, and I think with having that nervous system breakdown of something's not right, it's that fight or flight response towards it. It starts creating this internal struggle that we go through on a regular basis. And one, we never know all the justifications of why certain things are being made and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And what I've deducted over the years is a communication. There's a block in communication between an administration, between that leadership to their members, to the troops, of having this true understanding of why these decisions are being made. We're never going to be like all of these decisions that are coming down, but it's going to ultimately, every time there's a change towards something, internally we have that struggle of not agreeing with it, and how am I going to work around this and change that dynamic.
So there's a psychological concept called institutional betrayal, and it happens when organizations or even leadership fail to protect, support, or even act consistently with the values that they promote. And I'm thinking about how this usually happens with those long-term employees that you should be doing everything that you can in order to be able to retain. And the reason for that is because everybody is going to be like a shining star when you have a new officer or a new employee, regardless of where you work, because they don't want you to just jump ship when you were first hired. They perhaps might not want you to see the realities of what's going on with leadership. And then as things become more comfortable and you become more integrated and you become more complacent and comfortable in your place of work, meaning that it would be a lot more difficult for you to find something new versus sticking out what's going on with poor admin. That's when we see a lot of that institutional betrayal withdrawals start to take place. And it's really important to understand this concept, mainly because number one, we have seen many times over and over where an officer might be in a situation that it's nearly impossible to be able to get out of. And then I always stress the fact that everybody else would want you so much more than it's worth for you to be able to stick out that kind of angst. And I know how difficult that is. However, it's a lot of excuses, right? I don't want to have to drive as far. I don't want to have to move. I don't, whatever the thing is, there's always going to be more benefit towards doing that versus waking up every day and having the poor admin be the first thought in your mind.
Yeah, when they're living in your mind rent free, they're creating these stressors. You're having, it's raising your blood pressure. It's creating that stress to where you're not getting good sleep. There's so much negative feelings and emotions towards it. And I know of people who have had that problem, and they go to different places and they're like, man, it's night and day, because it's that different dynamic shift for them, because they go there and there's not their personal feelings and emotions tied into them from, say, if there's current admin that's looking at that individual and they don't like them for whatever reason it may be, and they go to this other place and they're like, oh no, you're great, and as long as you keep working hard and keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna go far here.
There are a lot of ways for us to understand whether or not this is showing up for us. And one of the biggest is actually hypervigilance at work. And I'm not talking about being a police officer going out there on the streets and having your head on a swivel. I'm talking about, oh shit, I have to sit in here with briefing. And then you get that feeling that kind of runs up your spine as soon as that one individual walks in.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced that, and everything's going good. It's your normal day to day. And then you see that one person walk in and you can feel like your stomach kind of sink back into your chest, and it's that weird feeling that you have that nobody likes. And whether it's one of your bosses or it's a peer, like, I think we all have those people, but it's recognizing that and knowing, okay, what's creating that.
And there's a lot of like emotional work that you can do, because I love being in situations like that. I recognize it and notice it first thing. And, after dealing with that for so many years in the place of work that I was in, it's something that I had told myself, like, it's kind of like being broken up with by my ex-fiance, right? There are certain things that happen to you when you go through certain elements of trauma that you learn from, and it ends up being a great gift, because there are things like that I would never allow myself to be able to go through again. And so a lot of times too, what I see, and I've seen this before in a place of work, where you see this emotional withdrawal from leadership, and I can literally picture a female's face when she's being belittled, basically, by the person that I used to work with. And you see, instead of them being emotionally involved and engaged and having concern or questions, they're completely blank, right? And totally withdrawn from the situation. So much so that you don't even know if they're hearing and comprehending what's being told to them.
Yeah, and it's when you start seeing that pattern being established, it's sad to, especially when you're bearing witness to someone being emotionally just wrecked by another individual, but also it's being there to support one another. And that's the hardest thing. Like, we all talk about, it's a brotherhood, it's a sisterhood of what we do. And I think over time is we kind of forget some of that, and you start allying yourself with these different groups, whether it's pro admin, against admin, or why can't we just all go to work and support one another?
Yeah, something else that I've seen is a lot of the times you might just stop speaking up, because silence feels a lot safer than opening up and being honest. Sometimes you'll see policy change without any kind of explanation, or you start to feel super disposable and not valued anymore. Maybe you are making those Google searches for new jobs in your area. And even so, we see morale a lot of the times replaced by compliance. And I hate to see that, because that's the type of work environment that starts to kind of take away a lot of that enrichment from the job that you signed up for in the first place.
Yeah, and it's like something that came to my mind as we're sitting here talking about this is like, I go way back in my career, there was a policy change, and like I read the policy change and I understood it, how it was written. And the only time I've ever been written up in my career was after this policy change, and I enacted it, and they said, oh, well, this is what it says, but that's not what we meant. And that's a normal thing for a lot of agencies. And after that, I was like, okay, well, I mean, they had to make an example out of me on it, and it was really silly and not called for, but it was one of those things that it changed my perspective, and we were going through a hard time in our department at that time too. And over time, like I moved past it, and of course it was a verbal counseling, which ultimately comes out of my file after a year. But it was one of those situations where that created the stressor upon me that was making me feel more negative about the department. But once that admin shift happened where those people left, and it's completely changed.
Yeah. And there are a lot of ways to protect yourself without burning out. And I think one of the first things and the most important thing, which we talk about all the time, is learning to separate your identity from your place of work. And I think too, having a peer level trust with somebody, it matters so much, because you need somebody to be able to kind of talk shit with that you can trust without them like tattletaling on you. And that could be somebody you work with, it could be somebody else. And then making sure that you stay grounded in your personal values. I'm thinking about the instability that happened at your department when all things COVID were happening. So an example of this was us having that conversation of, if they think they're going to stick a needle in your arm, we're jumping ship. We're finding something else for you. And making sure that you learn different tools to regulate before you react. Because if you don't, those are the types of things that are going to create bigger problems. And a lot of the times when we take some time to be able to decide what we want to say, or even run those, yesterday we had somebody message us something similar, like, here's the email I'm going to send to my boss, basically. And I ran through it with them and pointed out some things that you might want to pause for a second and take another look at. So I think all of those are really important. I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below. And as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.
Whether you're solving murders during breakfast, cracking cold cases on your commute, or playing amateur detective at bedtime, Amazon Music's got millions of podcast episodes waiting. Just download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite true crime podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.